fact, let's introduce him right now. DJ Yoda. Let's give him a hand.
Well, probably like a good place to start is what my thinking was when I was asked about what album I wanted to play. And I was half thinking Nas Illmatic, because that's a really classic album as well for different reasons. But I went with this, and then the immediate problem that I had was like Midnight Marauders or Low End Theory. So this is going to be like the controversial thing. If you're into hip hop in any way, you know about A Tribe Called Quest, then you know that like everyone considers Low End Theory and Midnight Marauders the two classic albums. You have to choose like between the two of them. If you have to, it's really difficult. And to be honest, they're both incredible. Like it's really hard to pick one of them.
Do we have to choose in a way?
If I had to choose, I'd go this, and I'll explain why. But there's not very much in it. I think the only thing, I think this has got a slightly better cover, and there's maybe one or two songs on Low End Theory that make it not perfect to me. Not that there's bad songs on there, but there's two that make it not perfect. Whereas this, I think every song is perfect. But yeah, Native Tongues. For those that don't know what Native Tongues is, it was a collective that kind of reached its peak in the 90s, golden era of hip hop. Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, Jungle Brothers, a whole bunch of other people as well.
Bonnie Love, Queen Latifah, let's not forget the ladies.
Yeah, exactly. But the kind of the appealing thing to me about Native Tongues was it was a real backlash against the kind of like posturing and macho kind of guns and gangster stuff going on in hip hop. It was a lot more creative, a lot more positive, conscious, just fun. In a good way. And I think that actually by the time it got to Midnight Marauders, it wasn't really about the kind of Africa thing and partying. It was a different thing, but it's still so creative and interesting in a way that so much other hip hop isn't. So that's why I went Native Tongues and Tribe Called Quest.
We should also mention Native Tongues also got some inspiration, maybe not as much being as overtly political, but African Bambaataa, the Zulu Nation, as being a collective. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean that's what this kind of Native Tongues thing was born out of, and really that's like what has always been appealing about hip hop to me is that kind of Zulu Nation idea that Africa Bambaataa started off with was hip-hop as a positive force and as a way to forget the negative stuff that goes on in the world rather than kind of propagate the negative stuff that goes on in the world. And what Zulu Nation did, especially at the parties musically, was just throw in every kind of music. And I mean, we were just listening to the De La Soul album before we started talking, and it was striking me just the eclectic samples that they were using. There's Johnny Cash sampled on that album, there's kids records, there's French instructional records, and that comes from that Africa Bambaataa Zulu Nation thing of just, we'll play a rock record, we'll play a country record, just anything that we think is funky, or we find a way to flip it and make it hip hop. And that's really appealing to me, that you can collect all your influences and make something new out of it.
Yeah, Africa Bambaataa is very good at that, especially with playing like Kraftwerk.
Yeah.
Instance, up in the Bronx. I mean, it was like
to play like German
revolutionary.
Electronic music to hip hop heads is pretty weird. Yeah.
And I like that because obviously they go into jazz, but also on this album I think there's Billy Squier, Malcolm McLaren. It's not just sampling all different jazz tracks as well.
But that's something that I really wanted to like explain about why I love this album, is to do with the samples and the use of sampling. It is kind of mainly jazz, but not exclusively. But the thing that makes this album amazing to me is that it's so hard to make a hip hop album that is cohesive, because when you are a band, like a rock band where you're all playing instruments, you go in a studio, you have a session, you make an album, things are going to sound cohesive because you're playing the same instruments on every song, everything's recorded in the same room, there's a reason why all that stuff sounds similar and an album fits together. With this era of hip hop, when you're sampling all these different types of music, recorded in different ways, throwing it all together, it's not very easy to make all that stuff sound like one piece. And the genius of this album is that despite all the sources from the samples, it all kind of sits together and feels right as one whole piece. And I really can't think of another hip hop album that does that. As amazing as 3 Feet High and Rising is a bit all over the place. That's one of its charms, but that's the genius of this, is that it all sits together and feels like one thing.
It does. Also, I think they also were purposely going for a slightly more commercial production sound.
Yeah, it had a sheen to it, definitely, and then that's one of the differences between this and Low End Theory, is that Low End Theory, like the name suggests, was very bassy, very kind of guttery, head noddy, kind of, yeah, with the jazz influences too. But this has got a kind of sparkle to it sonically that, again, I can't think of another album that replicates that kind of a sound. And I'm thinking about tracks like Lyrics to Go, where they sample Minnie Riperton, and there's just one high note that she sings that is just on loop for the whole song. She just for the entire song. And I can't think of another hip hop song that does that. It's such a weird way of sampling in such a unique way, but it gives it this kind of ethereal. And then listen to it, when we play the album, there's times when they're rhyming and the beat drops out and it just feels like you're floating for a second, and then the beat comes back in again, and it's just that kind of like, it's like goosebumps time, that stuff. It's really, really clever.
And could we say this is probably the last true, real representation of native tongues almost on wax? Can we say
like
that?
That's a matter of opinion. For me, yes. And like, this is the wildly controversial thing that I'll throw out there, that after this album, Tribe Called Quest hooked up with Dilla. And for me personally, that ruined Tribe Called Quest. Like, I know like JD was like clever in his own right. It's never really been my kind of thing so much. And I know there's people going, but like for me, like that just took away from what Tribe Called Quest were. And this was like their peak as far as I'm concerned, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And
it's worth talking about the cover as well, just while I remember, and it's there in front of me, because that's like part of it for this. They did 3 versions. There was like one with a black border, one with a red border, and one with a green border. And although this is the black border, that was the rarest one to find back in the day. I think this is a reissue, so that's why it's got it on. But each one of those had different faces in the background, and just the genius of like getting all the different people that meant something in hip hop on their album cover. It's like, it's kind of got 2 meanings. First of all, it's like hip hop as a unity, like a kind of native tongues kind of thing, like we're all together, but it is also a little bit like, look, we can get everyone in hip hop, no matter who they are.
Look at us.
Yeah, look at us.
We're at the top of our
game.
game.
And from like Ice-T, West Coast stuff, to all these old Kool Moe Dee and Afrika Bambaataa, but then the people they're working with too, Beastie Boys, just everyone's on there. And it does give you that feeling of like, oh, this is like the epitome of hip hop. This is everyone and everything.
It's kind of like the Sgt. Pepper of hip hop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sense.
Yeah,
I think all the different faces represented.
And then I was reading Q-Tip talking about it, and he said that the woman represents hip hop in itself. And there's all these conspiracy theories about, oh well, some people aren't wearing headphones. What does that mean? And he's like, it just meant that we couldn't find headphones at the photo shoot. It doesn't mean anything.
That's simple.
Yeah.
That's simple. Any closing words that you would like to say about Tribe Called Quest? I mean, how do you feel about it today? Why does it still last? Why is this? It's 21 years ago this was released.
So much of the things that I love from when I was a kid growing up, it's partly to do with personal experience and what that means to you. And that's also why I chose this album over Low End Theory, because I do remember like waiting for this album to come out, going to the shop, buying a CD, going home on the tube, holding the CD, just going, I want to just hear this. That doesn't exist now. You just download it, listen to it. I was like, what does it sound like? And it's part of me, and it's part of growing up, and it's informed everything that I do, and so much of the hip hop that I love now is informed by it. So it's just, the influence is the main reason that I picked it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Give it up for DJ Yoda.